Imagine leaving your child in a luxurious mansion with everything money could buy. A private chef, a mansion in Beverly Hills, more than $60,000 sent every single month for his care. And then, one day, you return home after 3 months away. You hug your child, and he screams in pain. Not because he fell, not because he was sick, but because something terrible had been happening to him the entire time you were gone. Something so disturbing that within 30 minutes of seeing his son, a billionaire father dialed 911 with shaking hands. What doctors discovered that night would expose a shocking truth hiding behind wealth, luxury, and designer clothes. But before we continue, take a moment to imagine something. What would you do if the person you trusted most with your child turned out to be the one destroying them? This is the story of David Harrison and his son, Ethan. The door of the sleek private jet slowly opened as the aircraft came to a stop at Los Angeles International Airport. Cool evening air rushed into the cabin. David Harrison stepped down the stairs. For most people at the airport, his arrival meant nothing. But in the business world, David Harrison was a legend. At 42 years old, he had built one of the largest technology companies in the United States. His company was worth billions. But at that moment, none of that mattered to him, because for the past 3 months he had been traveling across Europe negotiating a massive corporate merger. And during those 3 months, he had been away from the most important person in his life, his 7-year-old son, Ethan. Since his divorce the year before, Ethan had been living primarily with his mother, Vanessa Cole. David had agreed to pay enormous child support, more than most families earned in an entire year. He believed that money would ensure Ethan had everything he needed. Still, a strange uneasiness had followed David everywhere. As he stepped onto the runway, he immediately saw the black limousine waiting for him. Standing beside it was Vanessa. She looked flawless as always. Her blonde hair fell perfectly around her shoulders, and she wore an elegant designer dress.
Next to her stood Ethan, but something felt strange immediately. The boy was dressed in a tight designer suit that looked far too formal for a child. His hair had been heavily styled with gel, and instead of running toward his father, he stood completely still, like a statue. David smiled widely and jogged toward him. "Ethan!" He dropped to one knee and opened his arms. "Come here, buddy." Normally, Ethan would have leapt straight into his father's embrace, but today, the boy didn't move. His arms hung stiffly at his sides. His eyes stayed fixed on his shoes. David felt a small knot form in his stomach. "What's wrong, son?" he asked gently. "Don't you recognize Dad?" Ethan said nothing. His breathing seemed shallow. David leaned forward and hugged him anyway. But the moment his hand touched the lower part of Ethan's back, the boy suddenly jerked violently. "Ah!" A small cry escaped his throat. David froze. That wasn't normal. Then he noticed something else, a faint sour smell. Before he could react, Vanessa stepped forward. Her expensive perfume filled the air. "Okay, reunion done," she said impatiently. "Let's go. The wind will ruin Ethan's hair." David looked confused. "Why is he so tense?" "Tense?" Vanessa scoffed. "I spent hours getting him ready for you." She grabbed Ethan's wrist and pulled him toward the car. The boy stumbled, his face twisted with pain, but he stayed silent. The strange ride home. Inside the limousine, David patted the seat beside him. "Come sit with Dad." Ethan quickly shook his head. I can stand."
David blinked in surprise. "Why? It's a long ride. I want to look out the window." The boy stood awkwardly with his legs slightly apart, gripping the door handle tightly. Even though the car's air conditioner blasted cold air, sweat rolled down Ethan's forehead. "Are you feeling okay?" David asked. "I'm fine," Ethan whispered, but he never once looked his father in the eyes. The moment everything changed. When they arrived at David's mansion in Beverly Hills, Ethan stepped out slowly, very slowly. Each step looked painful. His legs moved stiffly, almost like a robot. Inside the living room, David tried to lighten the mood. He placed several gift boxes on the coffee table. "Look what I brought you from London," he said with a smile. "A limited edition Lego set." Ethan stared at the box. For a moment, his eyes lit up. Then, fear replaced the excitement. Vanessa crossed her arms impatiently. "Ethan, sit down and play so I can leave," she said. "I have dinner plans." David frowned. "You can't stay and eat with your son?" "I have my own life, David." Then she glared at Ethan. "Sit now." The boy trembled. Slowly he bent his knees. David smiled softly. "That's it." But the moment Ethan sat down, a horrifying scream shattered the room. "Ah!" Ethan collapsed sideways onto the carpet. His hands clutched his lower body. Tears streamed down his face, but he bit his lips so hard it began to bleed just to stop himself from crying louder. "Ethan!" David rushed forward. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, he's being dramatic." "Shut up!" David shouted. It was the first time he had yelled at her since their divorce. He touched Ethan's shoulder. The boy's skin was burning with fever. "It hurts, Dad!" David carefully loosened Ethan's belt. When he pulled the pants slightly down, a horrible smell filled the room. David's heart nearly stopped. The skin on Ethan's lower body was red, swollen, and badly infected, severely irritated, raw. It looked like untreated wounds that had been ignored for days, maybe weeks. This was not an accident. This was neglect. "Call 911, David shouted. The hospital. Doctors rushed Ethan into the emergency room. After examining him, the chief pediatric doctor pulled David aside. "Mr. Harrison," he said gravely, "your son has severe infection caused by prolonged neglect and poor hygiene." David felt his knees weaken, but the doctor continued, "We also found something else. There are fresh abrasions around the infected area. Someone tried to scrub the skin very aggressively." David's voice trembled. "Why would someone do that?" "To hide the smell and the condition of the wounds," the doctor replied quietly. Across the room, Vanessa stood near the door, scrolling through her phone,
avoiding his eyes. Over the next day, the truth slowly surfaced. Ethan had been starving. Neighbors revealed that he sometimes searched the backyard for fallen fruit to eat. Once, he had been seen drinking water from a garden hose because the back door was locked. Meanwhile, Vanessa had spent the child support money on luxury shopping trips, parties, and vacations with another man. When David finally saw the full evidence, he didn't scream. He didn't rage. He became calm, dangerously calm. The next morning, he asked Vanessa to come to the hospital. He told her he needed her signature for important insurance paperwork. She arrived dressed perfectly, confident. But when she entered the meeting room, 2 police officers were waiting. On the table lay bank statements, medical reports, and security footage. The video showed Ethan knocking on his mother's bedroom door at 2 a.m. She never opened it. Vanessa's face turned pale. Minutes later, handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She was arrested for child neglect and abuse.
Months later, David stepped down as CEO of his billion-dollar company. He moved with Ethan to a small beach house along the California coast. For the first time in his life, he chose time over money. One afternoon, Ethan rode a small blue bicycle across the yard. A gust of wind knocked him over. The boy fell onto the grass. But instead of crying, Ethan curled into a ball and covered his head, waiting for someone to scream at him. David rushed over and knelt beside him. "Hey," he said gently, "are you okay?" Ethan slowly looked up. "I fell." "That's okay," David smiled. "Bikes fall sometimes." Tears filled the boy's eyes. He reached out his small hand. David grabbed it immediately. "I'm here, son, and I'm never leaving again." For the first time in a long time, Ethan smiled. Sometimes the most dangerous place for a child is not outside in the world, but inside the home where they are supposed to be loved. Money cannot replace attention. Luxury cannot replace care. And no success in the world is more important than protecting the people who depend on us. If you learned anything from this story, please kindly subscribe to Echoed Tales for more emotional and meaningful stories like this. Because sometimes the stories we hear can remind us what truly matters in life.